Hey, this is Brent Leary, and I'm sitting in the A1 Broadcasting Studios here in Atlanta, Georgia, sitting with Jason Dorsey. I love the Center for Generational Kinetics. And we're going to talk about a new study that Jason and his team did with the folks over at the ASBDC around America's small business voice. So first off, Jason, thank you for joining me today.
Hey, thank you for having me. Glad to be here. It's an important topic.
That's right. So before we jump in and get going on the important topic and some of the results that came out of the study, maybe you can give me a little bit of your personal background.
Yeah, sure. So I'm the president and co-founder of the Center for Generational Kinetics. We're the #1 millennials research firm in the world. We started the firm about 7 years ago. And this year, for context, we'll have about 200 clients, which is
nice.
Pretty wild, all around the world. Before that, I've written a lot of books, been on tons of TV shows, spoken all over the world, started my own companies, and just really passionate about the topic. So kind of a perfect storm for the study.
And you've done all that. Do I even ask how old you are at this point?
Well, today's my birthday, and I turned 39. So yeah, I just look remarkably older.
You don't. You look remarkably younger. Well, first of all, happy birthday.
Hey, thank you. Thank you.
And glad you get a chance to spend it in Atlanta.
Yeah, thank you.
So tell us a little bit about this survey, this study that you did with the ASBDC folks.
Yeah, so what we realized is there's been a lot of conversation around entrepreneurship, small business owners, by generation, but not much data, which is pretty surprising. So everybody thinks they know, right? Oh, millennials are this and baby boomers are this or whatever, but there's no real data, and certainly not what we would consider statistically valid data, which means it accurately represents the US Census. So I want to look at millennials and have a high level of confidence that when I'm looking at the data, I know it really represents them, not just some like silly survey somebody puts on their website, but accurately represents. So when we approached the study, the idea was, in order to get the accuracy that we needed, this is too complicated, but it's pretty neat to think about, the margin of error plus or minus 3.1, which is what we're going for. We surveyed 1,000 people across America, weighted to the census, and really said, what are the drivers of small business? What does it look like by generation? Even things like gender and geography, trying to understand what's going on. And so for us, when it came down to millennials, there were some pretty shocking findings. And we saw those, we're like, yes! Because you never know, right? We never know what we're going to find. And the study really showed that millennials do have this entrepreneur mindset, this desire, this drive to own their own businesses. In fact, more than any other generation. But there's certain things that they're looking for. In this particular case, it turns out what they're looking for, America's SBDC happens to offer. But really what it comes down to is education and access and even money. You know, access to capital is a huge issue. It's very easy to say, I want to start my own business. But then when you get into the details, people are like, whoa, well, I need to know how to do that, and where am I going to get the money from? But some of my favorite findings from the study, one kind of shocking finding, which is big picture, because remember, we're not just talking about millennials, we're talking about every generation. We found that about 34%, so over a third of all Americans have worked in a small business at some point in their life.
Yeah.
Which is huge. I mean, we think about small business trends, we think about these kind of conversations, how important is it? Well, you have a third of all Americans have said they've actually worked in a small business. That's a big deal. We think about small business, frequently as this economic driver, or maybe even, the mom and pop, mailing place down the street or a little bakery. We don't realize that literally 1 out of every 3 people in America has worked in a small business. We tend to think of big employers, but that's not really where the employment's happening. So that was exciting for us. And then in terms of millennials, and to clarify, I like to define millennials. So millennials in the US are older than most people think. Most people think millennials are 25 and their pants are falling off and they live with their mom, right? And we don't want to work unless you're going to promote us the first week. And a lot of that stuff is just myth. It's not true. At our center, the Center for Generational Kinetics, we're really into demything a lot of that. That's why we founded the center. So for example, we found that millennials are the largest generation in the United States workforce. Most people don't know that. They think we're broke and unemployed. They think we don't have any money, right? And yet millennials are going to outspend every other generation in the US this year. Again, myth versus reality. And then when you get into the actual study, what we found was that almost half of all millennials in America, and that's a big number, about 80 million, almost half of all millennials, about 40 million, say they want to start their own business in the next 3 years. So when you look at everything from the government policy conversation to banking, to access to capital, to all these other ways to raise money even, what you see is a generation that says, we want to own our own business.
Let me ask you real quick
sure.
around that. Are they going into any different kinds of businesses than their parents or grandparents are going into? What are they focusing on, and how does it compare and contrast?
A great question, really insightful question. So historically, when you talk to somebody about starting their own business, and you would say, what would you need? They would say, oh, well, we need a storefront, we need inventory, we need employees, we need all this stuff. Millennials don't think about that, right? For us, a store is entirely online. It's entirely on our phone. And so certainly we're seeing a lower threshold in terms of becoming your own business owner, because you could go sell stuff on Amazon and suddenly you own your own business. You can get an Etsy shop. There's lots of different ways to look at it, along with services. And even the concept of the gig economy, the idea that I can be a freelancer on the side and effectively own my own business, that seems normal for millennials. Other generations, that's a learned behavior. That's very different than they were raised, right? That's not owning your own business. And we're like, hey, look, they're making good money. They're creating jobs. They're doing all these cool things. They just may not have the overhead. So we certainly see millennials more open to starting these low-cost kind of on-demand businesses, for sure. In fact, there's a question of, does the concept of an entrepreneur even change? Does the concept of being a small business owner suddenly look different when you have a generation that says, no, I don't need business cards and a storefront. You know, I need a fast internet connection, right? So for sure we're seeing that with millennials. Now, where it gets interesting is, as I alluded to, millennials are getting older than people think. In fact, sometimes you hear people say, gosh, we've been talking about millennials a long time. Well, the reality is, because we have been talking about them a long time. They're now 39. The oldest millennials in the United States are turning 40 this year. Most people don't know that.
Middle age is staring them right
in the face.
Yeah,
we're going to start getting facial hair. Some of us, I'm still waiting. But, so there's certainly, millennials are continuing to get older. The oldest millennials in the U.S. were born around 1977. Somewhere between 1977 and 1980 is kind of the accepted range. In terms of the youngest millennials, though, they were born up to 1995. And this was an important, we have a lot of people watching today that market to millennials. The big divider between millennials and Gen Z, who's the next generation, is that Gen Z does not remember 9/11. And so if 9/11 has always been history to you, you're not a millennial, you're Gen Z. So there's an important distinction there. There's some fallacy going around saying that millennials go to the birth year 2000, and it's wrong. If you can't remember 9/11, you're not a millennial, you're Gen Z. So for the purposes of the study, what got me really excited was that 61% of all the millennials said that they think there is more job security in owning your own business than working for somebody else. That's a huge statement.
Yeah.
I mean, think about what that means for employers like me. We have 4 generations in our workforce at our company. But it's just, okay, so if you think owning your own business is more secure, more stable than actually working for somebody else, how does that change your career path? How does it change the importance of having resources like an America's SBDC, or even, the kind of resources you provide, being able to go somewhere and get that information? Because before you couldn't get that. Yeah. Where would you go to get that? Well, now having all that attainable is a really big deal. So what we saw in the national study is that millennials do want to start their own business. They're specifically looking for access to education, access to capital, people to mentor and help them. But they say they want to do it more than anybody else, and they think that's a more stable career path, which is kind of mind-blowing for a lot of people, right?
Yeah, that is pretty amazing. Let me ask you one last question, because you talk about so many differences that they have. Well, and they need education.
Yeah.
But how do you serve millennials best? How do you educate them in a manner that's going to be the most accepting for them?
Excellent question. So what we know is that millennials are largely visual learners. The big part of our business, so we do research and then we do a lot of consulting work. So these big companies hire us to come in and we actually have to figure out, how do we train millennials? Same thing when we work with startups. Startups need to train millennials, but they don't have a training department, right? So what do you do? and this is really important for all the entrepreneurs out there. What we found is that millennials are almost entirely visual learners. So what that means is they've been conditioned to learn through YouTube. That's their most trusted learning resource. So the opportunity there is any company of any size, whether 2 people or 2,000, can start to develop training that they can use because it's just on video. Take your smartphone, film some training, watch interviews like this. There's a way to teach that way. But where the rubber really hits the road is actually in practice. And that's when we find they need somebody in person or a mentor like an America's SBDC, but they need a resource to say, okay, when things don't go exactly the way you were taught, what do you do? Because that's where a lot of millennials struggle, is both the adversity piece, which is going to happen, and the problem-solving piece. And the reason is we don't have the experience. And without the experience, it's very hard to be successful, no matter how many videos you watch. So it's really a combination of that. It's this integrated learning experience. So we think mentoring is really important. Incubators are really important. Anything you can do to help them gain that experience, overcome some adversity, learn how to problem solve, That's really the key when it comes to being a successful entrepreneur. You can find all the other pieces. If you don't have that inside you, you have nothing.
So this has been a great conversation. But before I let you go, you got to tell folks where they can learn more about the study and also just learn more about millennial entrepreneurship.
Sure, absolutely. So the best place to go to get the entire study, see the infographic, get all the data, because there's so many findings I couldn't cover in the time we have, is americassbdc.org. And if you go right to the homepage, you'll see a link. You can click on it. It'll take you right to all the study findings, infographic, all the good stuff you need. If you want general information on millennials, you can go to our website, and we'll also link back to the study. And our website is genhq.com. And so however way you go there, get the study, read the report. I mean, there's some shocking stats. Like, the reason why millennials want to own their own business is not what most people think, but you got to go to the site to figure it out.
Nice tease, man.
You like that? All right.
Thanks for your time.
Hey, thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Yep. All right.